weight of the world was a physical pressure on Alexander Croft's shoulders, a crushing force that made the vibrant green of the park seem muted and gray. He sat stiffly on a bench, a king dethroned, staring at the screen of his silenced phone. 27 missed calls. The board had voted. He was out. A lifetime of building, of sacrificing, of relentless ambition, had evaporated before the opening bell of the stock market. He was no longer Alexander Croft, CEO. He was just a man alone, hollowed out and utterly lost. The polished oak of his 60-foot conference table fut a lifetime away. Here, the bench was cold, hard ironwood, and the only thing on the agenda was the crushing void of his failure. He had told his driver to leave him here, in this pocket of manicured nature amidst the steel and glass of the city he once felt he owned. He needed to breathe, but each breath was a shard of glass in his chest. He replayed the meeting in his head. The cold, dismissive faces of the men he'd made millions for, their words not of gratitude but of blame. A single bad quarter, a risky merger that didn't pay off instantly, and they'd thrown him to the wolves. His wife had left him 2 years prior, citing his emotional absence. His son, a freshman at a college on the other side of the country, hadn't returned his last 3 calls. Alexander Croft had built an empire, but he had built it on sand, and the tide had come in. A small sound, a shuffling of feet on the gravel path, broke through his spiraling thoughts. He didn't look up. He couldn't bear to see the casual happiness of a normal person, a reminder of a simplicity he had somehow lost the map to. Then, a touch. A tiny, gentle pressure on his knee. He flinched and looked down. Standing beside him was a little girl, no more than 5 or 6. Her clothes were clean but faded, the cuffs of her jeans slightly too short. Her hair was a messy bun of dark curls from which a few strands had escaped. But her eyes were the color of rich chocolate, and held a depth of concern that stopped his breath. In her arms was a well-loved teddy bear, one eye hanging by a thread, its fur worn soft in places from countless hugs. The man who had commanded boardrooms with a glance was rendered speechless by a child. "You look sad," she stated, her voice soft but clear, devoid of pity, brimming with pure observation. Alexander could only manage a stiff, slow nod. His throat was too tight for words. She studied his face for a moment longer, her head tilted as if solving a great mystery. Then, with a resolve that spoke of immense courage, she held out the teddy bear. "You can take my teddy. His name is Captain Fluff. He's very good at hugs when you're sad. He makes it better." Alexander stared at the offered bear, then back at the girl's earnest face. This tatty, beloved piece of fabric was clearly her most prized possession. He, who could have bought 1,000,000 stuffed animals without noticing the expense, was being offered a treasure beyond price. I couldn't," he stammered, his voice rough with disuse. "He's yours. He'll miss you." The little girl shook her head, pushing the bear firmly into his hands. Her small fingers brushed against his, and the contact was like a static shock of pure, undiluted kindness. Nana says when you have something good, you gotta share it with people who need it more. You look like you need a hug more than me today." Before he could form another protest, a woman's voice called from further down the path. "Lily, come on, sweetheart. The bus is coming." "I gotta go," the girl, Lily said. She gave him a small, gap-toothed smile that could have powered a city block. "Bye, mister. Feel better." And with that, she turned and skipped away towards a weary-looking elderly woman, leaving Alexander alone on the bench. He sat frozen, holding the small, soft bear. The scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood clung to it. He looked at the loose eye, the patched paw, and something inside of him, something cold and fortified that had been years in the making, cracked wide open. A single, hot tear escaped his eye, tracing a path down his cheek. Then another. He brought the teddy bear to his chest, holding it tightly. It was absurd. A 58-year-old titan of industry, sitting on a park bench, crying over a child's toy. But in that moment, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a man being shown a profound, unasked for kindness by the smallest and least powerful of strangers. Captain Fluff, it turned out, was indeed very good at hugs. He didn't know how long he sat there, holding the bear, the weight on his shoulders feeling just a fraction lighter. The girl's words echoed in the hollow chambers of his heart. "You look like you need a hug more than me today." She had seen him. Not his suit, not his failure, not his wealth or his ruin, just his pain. and she had offered her only comfort. For the first time in decades, Alexander Croft began to think not about what he had lost, but about what he had never truly had. The bear sat on the passenger seat of Alexander's car, propped against the headrest. Captain Fluff became his silent, steadfast companion. The raw, gutting pain of his professional downfall didn't vanish, but it was now tempered by a strange, new curiosity. He found himself driving past the park at the same time every afternoon for a week, hoping to catch a glimpse of the girl and her grandmother. He wanted to return the bear, to thank her. To what? He didn't know. He just knew he needed to see that kindness again. On the 8th day, he saw them. They were not in the park, but at a bus stop across the street. The elderly woman, whom Lily called Nana, was counting change in her palm, her forehead furrowed with a worry Alexander recognized all too well. It was the look of not having enough. He pulled over, his heart hammering. Clutching Captain Fluff, he got out of the car and crossed the street. "Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than it had been in years. The woman looked up, startled, and instinctively pulled Lily closer to her side. Lily, however, peeked out and her face broke into a sunny smile. "Mister, you have Captain Fluff." "I do," Alexander said, kneeling down to her level. He held out the bear. "I brought him back. Thank you. Hey, he helped a lot." Lily took the bear and hugged him tightly. "I told you he would." Alexander rose and turned to the grandmother. "My name is Alexander Croft. Your granddaughter. She did an incredibly kind thing for me last week, when I was having a very difficult day." The woman's wary expression softened slightly. "She's got a good heart, my Lily. Too good for her own good sometimes." She introduced herself as Eleanor. "If it's not too forward," Alexander began, choosing his words with more care than he had in any business negotiation. "I noticed you waiting for the bus. Could I offer you a lift? It's the least I can do." Over the following weeks, Alexander's offer of a ride became a routine. He learned their story during those short drives. Eleanor was Lily's sole guardian, working 2 jobs to keep them afloat in a tiny apartment. Lily's mother, Eleanor's daughter, had struggled with addiction and had disappeared years ago. They had no one else. They were fighting every day, not for wealth or power, but for simple stability. For each other. Alexander began to see his own life in stark contrast. He had fought for a legacy of stock options and headlines, and he had ended up alone. They fought for love, and they had each other. He started showing up with groceries, pretending he'd bought too much. He had a local handyman, repairs on their apartment, which were then mysteriously paid for by an anonymous city grant. He fabricated. He wasn't being a CEO, he was being a friend. He was learning, for the first time, how to be part of a community. One afternoon, Eleanor confided in him, her voice thick with fear. The building had been sold to a developer. They were being evicted. They had nowhere to go. The old Alexander would have been the developer. The new Alexander saw a different opportunity, using the last of his considerable personal capital, not the company's, his own. He did something audacious. He bought the building. Not to tear it down, but to preserve it. He established a housing trust to ensure it remained affordable in perpetuity for its tenants. He offered Eleanor the job of building manager, a dignified role with a solid salary that meant she could finally breathe easy. But his greatest act was for Lily. He hired the best private investigator money could buy. He didn't know if he could find her mother, or what state she would be in if he did. But he had to try. For Lily. Months later, the investigator found her. She was in a rehab facility in another state, clean for 6 months, working her program, and desperately hoping for a chance to see her little girl again. Alexander arranged it all. The reunion, in the park where it had all begun, was a quiet storm of tears, not of sadness, but of hope and tentative healing. He stood back, watching Lily hug her mother, Eleanor crying tears of joy, and he felt a sense of accomplishment that dwarfed any corporate victory. Years later, a photo sat on Alexander's desk in his new, smaller office. It wasn't a photo of him on the cover of Forbes. It was a picture of him, much older and infinitely happier, sitting on that same park bench. On one side was Lily, now a bright young teenager, and on the other was her mother, healthy and strong. On his lap sat a very old, well-loved Captain Fluff. He had lost an empire built on profit, but from a single act of childish compassion, he had gained a kingdom built on love. He had learned that the greatest wealth isn't measured in stock portfolios, but in the connections we make and the kindness we dare to offer, especially to strangers. The little girl in the park hadn't just given him a teddy bear, she had given him back his humanity, and in doing so, had shown him how to truly build a life that mattered. Moral of the story: the smallest act of genuine compassion can break down the tallest walls of a lonely heart and change the course of multiple lives forever.